Today, chaps, I was a victim of a horrible, vicious, and cruel joke. But most importantly, the victim of false information. I naively agreed to drive my mother and my gran to an outlet centre near Ross-on-Wye. Now, like many of you, when I hear outlet centre, I think of big brands, low prices. So you can understand why I agreed to make this trip for my relatives. This, however, is my harrowing story. 5 minutes into the drive, and the usual repetitive symphony of slow down and you're going too fast, and cut with falsetto calls of think of the fuel economy. I'd like to think that over the years I have developed an acute ability to ignore my mother's requests to do things I don't want to do, the joys of being a teenager once. However, this constant whining is sadly unignorable. Having done well, however, not to commit homicide at 70 miles an hour, we did eventually arrive at our destination. I was relieved. I thought that we had finally arrived at this hidden gem, this mecca of cut-price shopping and retail therapy. My journey was over. I could almost taste the savings. All I had to do was park. After being directed by my mother to an abandoned building site, and definitely not the car park, I decided to take navigation into my own hands. Having finally found a space in the car park, I noted at this point there seemed to be a few more disabled bays than one would normally expect. I unpacked my grand's shopping trolley and we began our trek to the entrance. Here, my friends, is where it all went downhill. What I was expecting was white neon fluorescent lights, multiple shops. What I was greeted with, however, was a big beige warehouse full of, pensioners. It was like the equivalent of watching children at Toys R Us. So began my nightmare at Pensioners R Us. I was comforted by my mum, who told me, "No, it's not for old people. My friends love this place." This held little gravitas for me, mostly because my mother's friends are all above 58. I found myself breaking from my mother and grandmother to the sensible shoe section. Buy one pair of orthopedic sport shoes, get one compression stocking free. 20 minutes later, it felt like an hour, I found myself in despair after finding that my trip to the sports aisle had been less than fruitful. It consisted of one oversized Nike t-shirt, with the remainder of the sports aisle full of golf jumpers and socks. You know, the ones with the quintessential pastel contrasting diamond patterns. I couldn't take much more of this geriatric TK Maxx. I had to get out. I had to find my gran. Finding a little old lady in a crowd of little old ladies, for those of you interested, is impossible. Fortunately, I survived the ordeal thanks to an emergency Hershey's chocolate bar that my gran had kindly bought for me. As soon as my mother had bought some sensible shoes and a nice and also sensible cardigan, I was out the door. I'm not proud of shoulder-barging old ladies, but as they say, desperate times calls for desperate measures. We eventually made our way out into the busy hive of activity that is Ross-on-Wye. When I say hive of activity, I'm lying. Ross-on-Wye is what happens when you don't control the influx of old people into an old people's home, and the pensioners spread around the surrounding area. I will spare you the details of the next 2 hours of skullduggery that followed. Sunday afternoons in Ross are basically, quiet, to say the least. They say there can be no sound in space, but compared to Ross, you're gonna need ear defenders. You will be happy to know, however, I am home safe, listening to dubstep in an attempt to regain the years of youth I feel like I have lost this afternoon. Although I could really go for some sensible shoes. Spectacles out.